So hey guys, it's Stephen here, and welcome back to another episode of Heart of the Matter. So this year, we had Valentine's and Singapore's budget speech fall on the same day. Budget Day is the one day of the year when all of us find out how much money we're going to get from the government. For some things, that is, but also how much more we will have to pay for some other things. In our last episode, we asked our guests what their wish lists were, and I have to say at least one wish came true. Our young guest Benny Koh, who was priced out of a resale HDB flat, preventing him from marrying, will now get up to $190,000 in grants. Immediately, that's a $30,000 injection. And now that details of the Budget 2023 have been rolled out, we want to unpack and get to the heart of what DPM Lawrence Wong delivered in his speech. Joining me today are Associate Professor Walter Theseira. He teaches economics at the Singapore University of Social Sciences and is a former nominated Member of Parliament.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Dawn Cher, founder of financial blog SG Budget Babe.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Kurt Wee, President of the Association of Small and Medium Enterprises.
Hi Stephen. Hi, good to be back here.
All right, guys, a quick reaction to this year's budget. Show me with a thumbs up or thumbs down. Yay or nay? What do you think? Okay, Dawn, you have an in-between thumb sign. What does that mean?
I think there were some good stuff, but at the same time, there were a lot of trade-offs, and some of the increment benefits didn't really roll out to as many people as we hoped it would. So That's why I'm neither yay nor nay.
Okay, you were hoping for a bit more. Kurt, did you give a thumbs up or down?
It's more up than down.
Okay.
So more up because business really have not much to complain about because we actually already have quite a comprehensive slew of programs supporting different aspects of businesses. And it's really a further stimulation on the same direction with some additional stimulation. And really the government have actually spent a great deal of money the last 2 years supporting businesses through COVID. It's really also up to the businesses to really dig their heels and find new competitive frontiers.
Okay. And Walter, you were a bit of a thumbs down.
No, it was an up.
Was it up? Okay, sorry.
No, I think it's a thumbs up because, I really see it as a transitional budget. We're helping the economy and society transition into the post-COVID era. There are a lot of challenges that came out almost out of nowhere last year, with the Ukraine war, with hyperinflation, things like that. And I think in light of that, I think the budget does a decent job of trying to give Singaporeans, especially lower income ones, the kind of assurance that their day-to-day needs are taken care of. It tries to rebalance taxation a bit by increasing taxes to some extent on higher income Singaporeans and wealthier ones. And I think it does all of this reasonably well. And there are things that it hasn't done yet, but again, it's transitional. I think more will be done in future budgets.
Okay, so you said it does a decent job. But it was meant to be a Valentine's Day gift. So one would think maybe you've got to do more than decent. You've got to show me some love. I mean, did you feel the love?
No, I think the love was targeted at people who are different from me. Because, to be clear, right, if you talk about a problem like high inflation, who does high inflation hurt the most? It actually hurts lower income Singaporeans the most because even before high inflation hit, they were already living quite close, to the edge of their budgets. They were just barely covering their expenses. And when you have all these price hikes come in rapid succession, that was causing them a real difficulty. They might have to choose between, putting food on the table and paying for other bills. And I think the budget was aimed at giving them that assurance and giving them the handouts necessary to tide over this period of inflation. But for higher income consumers, it's not going to do that, right? It's not as if the government is going to give middle and higher income consumers the money that they need to eliminate the effect of inflation. That's not the objective. So It's not targeted at me per se, I think.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was targeted more at the lower income. I mean, they stand to benefit the most from this budget, right?
Well, I think if you're going to have babies and going to build a family, it's really going to help you.
Okay.
Right. But for businesses, it's really also giving help where it's needed. And if you look at it, the extension of the energy efficiency scheme, the extension of the enterprise financing scheme, it really focuses on where businesses have been hit. Energy costs,
right,
and also financing costs is going to be a big topic over the next 2 years.
And even an option to for if you want to innovate, they'll help you do that. They'll give you some
you've
funds
got
for
the
that.
enterprise
So
innovation
let me,
scheme.
Kurt, I'm going to hold you on that for a bit. But before we start talking about businesses, I want to talk about families first, because the housing grant is something that a lot of people are concerned about. It kicks in immediately. Lots of people are happy because there have been many frustrated first-time home buyers. So this, I guess, makes life a little bit easier. But some are saying, well, why increase subsidies when we should instead be perhaps reducing the cost of the flat itself? Isn't it a case of just taxpayers having to subsidize other taxpayers? I mean, Walter, what do you think we're missing from this narrative?
So I think the missing link in housing affordability is actually this element of choice. And a lot of young couples, they say that not being able to get a BTO, which is available and affordable quickly, that's the reason why they don't get married. And of course, if they don't get married early, then they wait to have children, they have fewer children. And so all this is a cascading effect. But when you look at the choices that many young couples are making, I think that the reality is many of our young couples are in a very good position. They're fortunate enough that they have the money to be able to stretch and to be able to ballot on a prime BTO. And the problem is, everybody wants those prime BTOs. So everybody's balloting for the same set of prime BTOs. They can't get them because everybody wants them. And many of these people are not willing to consider alternatives which are readily available today and much cheaper. But I can understand why. It's because they fear missing out on the chance to make very good capital appreciation on a prime BTO. But that's that element of choice which is the problem. And you can't really get rid of that or address that with subsidies directly because there's just a limited supply of those prime BTOs, prime resale, and you can't do anything about that.
I think one great thing though was the additional ballot chance that they gave because in the last few years we heard a lot ground sentiment about how folks are saying because of the crunch in the supply and then they don't have a house, they can't afford to wait the extra 2 to 3 years for the BTO to be built, so they had no choice but to go and give it up and then go to get a resale flat instead. So I think prioritizing this group who are about to have children or already have children is a really good reflection. And I feel like this was the biggest thing that came out of the budget for me, that the government did indeed listen, because this is a very big and painful problem for those affected by it in the last few years.
In fact, just last week we met a young Singaporean who said, he wants to get his flat. He wants to get married, but he can't get his flat yet. So he doesn't want to get married until he can, because he feels that, it's no different if I get married and I stay at home. And I guess he doesn't want to make babies at home in his parents' home. He wants to and fair enough, you want to start afresh on your own, right? So this will help that. I mean, Dawn, you're a mother of 2 young children. Both your husband and you are working. You also have a helper. So there was quite a bit also for the typical family out there in terms of baby bonuses, infant care leave, And of course, paternity leave. I mean, wow, I almost thought of having another kid, and then thankfully I changed my mind. But yeah. Did any of those appeal to you? Do you feel it's,
Well, I have to say first, I'm not going to have any other kids now. So
Didn't
it
change your
doesn't
mind?
really, it doesn't make a difference. But I can see how it really helps a lot of people. Because if we just look at the baby bonus, right, increasing it by 3,000 even though we're out of the pandemic, that's a really big amount to give for every single child. And I remember because I had my second kid during the pandemic, and that extra 3K was a big bonus to us. So extending that for longer is a really good move. And on top of that, there's also the option to add more to the CDA, right? So it rewards parents who are willing to put aside that money and not touch it for, liquid purposes. If you lock it in, the government helps to support that with a dollar top up. I thought that was a really good move. But I have to say though, the working mother's child relief was a big questionable debate, and I ran I asked around on my Instagram, I ran polls, and it seems like people are pretty divided on that, because it's like you don't know if you're gonna really benefit from the changes or not, because like what Walter mentioned, it's more for the lower income and those who are on the edge. But if you're not, I think if we consider the fact that the government is trying to increase the population, but yet a lot of women are now starting to hold their own in the workforce, and it's no longer surprising to see women earning more than the men. So this new change to go towards a fixed amount instead of a percentage kind of disadvantages the high income moms, doesn't it?
Yeah, to some extent. But I think, the broader context is over the years, the working mother's child relief has gradually become, you might say, more egalitarian. Because I think in the past there was very much this criticism that there was a particular group of women it really benefited, which were ultra high earning women, because way back in the past it was kind of unlimited, I believe, the cap that, that there was really no effective cap on the WMCR if you had a lot of children and you're a high earning woman, you see. And the purpose of rebalancing all of this, I think, has been to try to ensure that more of the benefits flow to more like the middle income taxpayers and women. So I think that's where it's coming from, basically.
Yeah, but we can't rule out the big question mark of whether this would then make those who are doing very well in their careers, and they're like, since I don't get benefit as much, maybe I just shouldn't have a kid. Yeah, it might. We don't know. We won't know.
I
until
mean,
few years
overall,
later.
we know that this budget really does take more from the rich and give more to the poor. If I can, sum it up. But Kurt, how come there's no working fathers tax relief?
Paid
Maybe there
paternity
is,
leave,
right?
Well, there's a rebate if you take that 2 additional weeks of paternity leave by the government to the company.
Yeah, what do you make of that? How do you think businesses are going to take to it?
I was just thinking that maybe for that particular year, the men can apply for exemption from reservists. And maybe MINDEF can be a bit more understanding just for that particular year, because you don't have babies every year anyway, right?
That's true.
So then that takes the load a bit off the employers for also supporting that
Because
as well.
otherwise there's reservists and the paternity leave. It's quite...
Annual leave, you add your public holidays.
That's true.
It's actually quite a lot of work time off in the year.
That's a good idea, actually, Yeah, for instead of reservists, you have the paternity leave. So, yeah, that's something that could be considered. But I mean, it really is a very clear and strong signal that they are saying, fathers, you better get more involved, get your hands wet, and get into those diapers yourself too, But even though we want this in a society where men, I guess, play a larger role in the parenting journey, but the reality is, as you mentioned, someone has to pay for it, right? So the government says they'll foot part of the bill, but Kurt, you're saying it's not just the money, it's the fact that you don't have the manpower is actually gone, right?
I mean, the fact that people don't have babies every year, I think it's still a manageable situation. 2 weeks, and you may not take the 2 weeks all at once. So among the family team of colleagues, right, it really hits the small companies a bit more, but small companies at the same time operate a bit more informal environment. They support each other, and I think SME bosses are quite understanding. They have to make some of these accommodations, especially in times where labor market is very tight. And also the other perspective, I think today running an enterprise is not just about profit. There's a role to play also in supporting whether it's your employees' careers, national defense, some of the national policy. Businesses have to play a role, especially in a country whereby human capital and we don't have much national resources. So it's really up to all of us.
Okay, so you feel the community can play a larger role in the sense that you all share the load. It's not just left to the one company to take on the burden of this guy.
Well, I think there's got to be some shared goals together, collective.
Okay, but did any of the people you spoke, any business leaders sort of say, oh man, it's just, more pain?
No, I think on the balance of it, if you look at it, there are also a slew of other initiatives that continue to double down on helping companies.
Okay.
So there's a good balance to it.
So, of course, many of these incentives were also given to encourage families to have more children. We know that's a very clear signal. But when we asked around, I think you agreed that, really the monetary incentives doesn't change a person's mind to saying, oh, suddenly because I get more CDA, I'm going to have more kids, So if that's the case, then Walter, perhaps you could help with this. Are we spending money in the wrong place? Because throwing money at this problem doesn't seem to fix it. Why not spend the money somewhere else?
Well, I think there are actually different elements of the Fidelity problem. That's what makes it so complex. That's also why any one policy by itself probably isn't going to move the needle a whole lot. I mean, if you think about the first element, right, which is that people don't get married early enough, they wait a long time to get married, that's where I think the BTO 2 weeks and so on, more availability and affordability, that's supposed to address that problem. The problem of how many children do you have, it's possible that the expansion in the baby bonus, more support and so on might convince somebody, okay, I've had one kid, now maybe I'm more willing to have the second one because things are going to be a bit easier this time. But I think ultimately there's this, broader issue, which is, do people feel that having children is worthwhile in Singapore? Can they see a future for their children in Singapore and so on? And I think that is quite a complex issue because one of the big things people bring up is, societal stress, competitiveness, worrying what's the position of my kids going to be. I mean, these are just, I really can't think of a government policy you can address this overnight, right? Because it really goes all the way down to the way that, as Singaporeans, the way that we think about our schools and so on, and what we think is a good life for our children. And you can't subsidize your way out of that, you know what I mean? That's the issue.
But I think having a good infrastructure and support system really helps. So one great thing I really like about this year's budget is how the childcare leave will now follow the number of kids, right? So they doubled it, right? But the downside is it only stops at age 2. Okay. So most of the support that you get, which is sending your kids to childcare, typically happens from 2 to 6. And that is still a big question mark. Like recently, hand, foot, mouth disease has been spreading, right? Your doctor gives you 5 days off. What's the company going to think of that? The mom, if they don't have anyone to help, it's going to be a very big challenge. As a parent myself, that's the biggest thing. Whenever my kids fall sick, what goes on in my mind is this going to affect my work? What will my boss think of me? And I think if we can have more assurance from both companies or maybe government policies that could help push this in the right direction to reframe mindsets, then that could be one thing.
Yeah, I don't see why companies will not be understanding with their team members if there is a family situation. I think, even without the additional leave, companies will allow the employees to actually take that time off to sort out. Because, if you don't sort out your family affairs, how are you going to work with peace of mind, right? So this particular situation, I see it as is an incremental anyway.
I think the challenge comes when you have more than one kid. With one kid, it's like, fall sick maybe 3 times a year.
Try 4.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
He's speaking from experience.
Yeah, I think it gets even harder. Someone in the household has to shoulder that, right? So that's where it gets tough.
I mean, the pandemic has taught us a lot about remote working and flexibility in that sense. So in a way, regardless of how many kids, I think it's partly also to do with the worker themselves. Because even though my kids are sick, if I know I have a project to finish, I still get it done somehow, working from home, right? And if you fulfill that, then your boss will be more willing to give you more leeway to, to deal with whatever is happening along the way, right?
Singapore is relatively small geographically, so, you're starting to deal with places are not too far away to go from.
Hi, my name is Julie Yu, and I'm the host of the Climate Conversations. Each week, I speak to guests who give us tips on how we can protect the Earth. Every once in a while, we also have interesting stories, like how Singapore's first Tesla owner prompted billionaire Elon Musk to reach out to Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, or a chef who makes the juiciest burgers from only plant-based ingredients. For more stories like these, look for the Climate Conversations on our CNA and Me Listen apps or wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, let's talk about CPF. Basically, they're going to raise it from 6,000 to 8,000. The annual salary ceiling doesn't change. The annual CPF limit doesn't change either. But does it actually just mean less money in my pocket at the end of the month? That's what some people are saying. Walter, what would you say to that?
Okay, given that the annual ceiling hasn't changed, but what's happening is you're upgrading the monthly ceilings, I think the primary aim really was trying to have some kind of equity between different workers, regardless of how your pay is structured, because there was a lot of variance, I think, for many workers in structure of pay. Some people were in jobs where they were used to fairly large year-end bonuses, so, they would get to the annual cap that way. Other people might have their pay more in terms of just the monthly, right? So I think the eventual aim for this policy change, as I understand it, is to have the monthly cap to be basically the annual cap divided by 12. That's the eventual change. But of course, along the way, what's going to happen is you will have a group of workers. They're going to be just above, I think, the median income or so. And they're the ones who will, I think, benefit from this change on net because they will actually have more effective pay as a result of the upgrading of the monthly salary cap. Of course, they're going to have to give more of their own wages in terms of contributions to their own account, but the employer has to match that, right? On the balance of the cap. So I think for that group of workers, there will be a substantial improvement to retirement adequacy, to housing affordability, and so on. And I think that's going to be good for them. But for a lot of workers, it doesn't matter because if you're lucky enough to have an income in excess of the annual cap, chances are you're already capped in terms of your contribution anyway. So there's no difference to you.
Right. So again, it means more to a certain demographic. Well, what about businesses, Kurt?
Well, from businesses, I think, it may represent some marginal increase in costs, but hopefully it'll also attract a greater working population as well.
Why would it attract?
Maybe some of the senior workers and some of the other retired or semi-retired people might come back to work, right? Because when you are slightly older, you get less CPF. And this hopefully would add a bit of workforce marginally to the total workforce. But so it'd be a bit of cost for the businesses. But at the same time, there's also the announcement on continued fund to reskill and upskill workforce, job redesign. SSG, WSG has done a great deal of work over the years in this regards. And I think there's still a lot of room for companies to tap these schemes so that they can actually also evolve higher value added workforce as well, which will help to balance some of these costs, hopefully.
Yeah, balancing is a key word. Minister Lawrence Wong mentioned job skill integrators. That's going to be a new term and new role where these guys will basically work with employers, help see what are the gaps between skills and manpower, help get them trained and
Yes.
hopefully fill those gaps, right? But does this also kind of say that skills future didn't really work? I mean,
No, not really. I think it means that we can get more efficiency in the process because economy, technology, skills, knowledge, all these really are moving at breakneck speed.
Right.
And SMEs sometimes they may not have the biggest bandwidth, time and resource to really get themselves updated or even have the resource to correctly hunt for the right headcount or train the right headcount. So I think this added layer will hopefully add some efficiency to that recruit, train and match
It's kind
process.
of a job matching scheme to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Right?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, you're finding the right guy and helping train them up and helping fill the gaps. So it's just that Skills Future has been around for so long. Sometimes I want to use it, but I haven't found...
I don't have time to use it.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, the Char Kway Teow class I want to sign up for is always fully subscribed, believe it or not,
Also, I think if you look at the landscape and you look at this chat GPT, right? You've got the GT3 version now, which is making people wonder how's that going to affect the labor landscape, the job landscape. You haven't talked about GT4 yet, which dwarfs the GT3 and makes the GT3 looks like a little kid.
AI is definitely going to, be progressively more intense and even smarter. What do you think, Dawn? Do you worry about your kids growing up?
I don't know what jobs will be left for them, but I think this whole initiative is great. If we can have more companies buying into the fact that, if you go for this course, then you might get more chances to get the job. I think that would give a lot of people more assurance.
But I think companies shouldn't build a business around government schemes. Companies have to really understand what they're trying to do, what they're trying to build. And then when there's a scheme to support certain angles or certain facets of them, that's good. Then there's a trampoline effect. And you really have to focus on a good business plan, good execution, and really grow a good enterprise.
I was going to ask you this question, Kurt, and it may not be so kosher for you to answer, but I sometimes think, are we giving away too much money to some of our companies so that they end up thinking, I should be getting this, and they expect it, and therefore you don't plan your business another way?
You look at the budget and you think that it looks like a lot of funds and handouts to companies, but in reality, a lot of it is tied back to fundamentals of stimulating good employment.
Okay.
There's some areas like in this current period of time that maybe it's got to do with energy efficiency.
Okay.
But that's also got to do with the long-term good of the company and the economy as a whole.
There is a fund for companies who want to innovate, to go global. But for the guy who perhaps just makes biscuit tins to sell, is that really going to make a difference?
You'd be surprised how if you remodel your business and you have a successful modular unit, how you can scale it. Right, I mean, you look at so many coffee chains that have really taken those barista coffee chains. Are they high tech? No, but with great packaging, you find it's a lot of micro businesses that are really flourishing out there.
Okay.
So I don't get fast because it's a technology company. I get really excited when I see a traditional company innovate themselves, reposition themselves, and then package themselves into success.
So let's ask the economists in the room. I mean, so this makes sense. I mean, this kind of stimulating the economy, businesses, there is a long-term benefit to it.
I think the role of the government is to try to overcome maybe certain market frictions or barriers or challenges which are preventing the economy, preventing the workers and businesses from realizing their potential. And maybe, just a couple of words about this whole job skills integration, why I think it's a quite important initiative at this point in time. What you really want to do is you want to find those workers who are maybe underemployed, maybe they're on the edge of being retrenched or they're currently out of a job, and you want to find the best fit for them because there's an employer out there who really needs their skills, or maybe with a bit of retraining, you can use them very profitably, right? And that's good for everybody. But if they don't have that matching and training, those improvements may never happen. And I'll say what is, I think, the current issue with, our skills training landscape that hopefully these initiatives will solve. The current landscape we have, I think, is very inclusive. That's a good thing about it. But it's also very, I would say, input-driven. Well, what do I mean by input-driven? I mean that a lot of the incentives, the subsidies, and so on are based on how many people you can train, How many people pass through your program, you get co-funding for that kind of thing. But that means that there's not as much, I think, attention paid to the outcome. And the real outcome we want is this guy gets a job. this guy gets a job that pays better than the old job he or she used to have before they got retrenched. Those are the outcomes. And I think what needs to happen here is there needs to be a bit of a change in the way system is structured so that we pay for outcomes, Of course, you can't pay only for outcomes, because what happens then is you find the people who are already a good fit and then you train them, right? And then you pretend that this is all due to your training. But we have to strike a better balance, move more towards outcomes, because outcomes are what I think companies want to pay for and what workers want to see. So that's what I hope to see out of this.
I think sometimes companies don't know what they don't know. So when you add some of these integration layers, it may also bring to the companies some additional knowledge and expertise on where they can look and what kind of people they can hire, or maybe they can do the same job in a different way that's more productive.
Okay.
Yeah, but I guess the big question in one's mind is how efficient would this new job skills integrated
We really got to try and squeeze all that efficiency in.
Yeah.
I mean, we will find out just how integrated it will be, and how skillful they will be, because they are job skill integrators, right? Okay, bad joke. Okay, we got to start wrapping up. So after all the goodies were doled out, Minister Wong took a lot of pains to explain how things have changed. The world has changed. Inflation pressures are here to stay. Geopolitics affects everything we do, The point being that I guess we're living in a world with a lot more uncertainty and resources are finite. So I think he wants to remind people that we can't keep giving stuff, We're going to run out at some point in time. But maybe from each of you, what is your takeaway from this? What do you think as we look at Singapore moving forward? What do you think is a message he wants to say? And what is your individual perspective of this whole situation?
I think for me, what I took away was that there's a lot more given to help the lower income, middle income. And we need to start to be more cognizant of that. A lot of the complaints typically come from people who don't get these benefits, but it's precisely because you don't need this benefit that you're not getting them. So getting that level of understanding as a society will really help to drive us forward and make sure no one's left behind. And then at the same time, I speak for parents here, really tackling the childcare issue, which is causing a lot of strain mentally and emotionally, and how some of these initiatives can help to move the needle in the right direction. But like what Kurt said, it's also down to the individual, the company culture. So there's only so much the government can do to put in all these money and direction. At the end of the day, will the individual take out the parent leave? Will the companies agree and not make a fuss or throw you the black eye when you say, I'm going to take my 2 weeks parental leave because my wife just gave
But
birth?
Dawn, at the same time, I think as parents, we just need to chill a whole lot more here in Singapore. We are really too kanchiong in that sense, and we worry about everything. I mean, this is a whole other discussion for a whole other podcast. Okay, Kurt, what about you?
Well, it's assurance budget, right? I think it's a signal whereby if there are macro dynamics, whether it's for the individual or for the enterprise, I think the government is signaling that they will be there to try and cushion out some of these effects. But personal responsibility, both as an individual, as an enterprise, to better yourself and to strive, and there'll be the carrots there to trampoline you further. So that's the message I get.
Okay. Walter?
I think it's a budget that tries to address both external and internal challenges that we face as a society and economy. I mean, on the external front, we've heard so much about the growing geopolitical competition, the changes to how companies and countries do business. And Singapore's a very small country, right? I mean, there's really not much we can do to change other people's minds about how they want to globalize or retreat from globalization. But the only thing we can do is ensure that we're known around the world, for a good governance, for good infrastructure, for having a high-skilled population, and that I think will, continue to serve us in good stead. And I think the budget continues to build on our traditional strength in that front. And I think on the internal side, the challenges are also well known: our aging population, generational shifts, possibly increasing polarization and stratification socially and economically. And there, I think it's really crucial that the budget not just increase support to Singaporeans who may have been maybe a bit left out of some of these movements, or maybe, have not been in a position to take advantage of these opportunities. So it's important to support them. But it's also equally important to do it in a way that I think is supported by the broad mass of society, because after all, many Singaporeans, the more fortunate of us, will be asked to pay a bit more over the next couple of years to pay for all of these increased social support. And so all of us need to be in the conversation together. We need to agree as a society that it is worth it to spend more money, spend more of our money to uplift the less fortunate Singaporeans around, among us, so that everybody is along for the same ride in the same journey. And I think the budget continues that progress. It's not something that started with the budget. It's something that's been going on already for a number of years.
Yeah, it is true indeed. And I think, the mindsets are changing too. So many people are welcoming that approach. Walter, Dawn, Kurt, thanks so much for dropping by the studio and joining us. Budget 2023, I think it's going to mean different things to different people, but the focus to help those who need it the most, I think that is definitely welcome. And of course, the doubling of paternity leave to 4 weeks. I mean, I almost wish my kids were young again, but then I remember how tiring it is, so actually, no, it's okay. But still, it's a great thing. So as my guests have pointed out though, money isn't the magic bullet. Some of the more difficult social challenges we face need more than just money to be fixed, and much of that begins with each of us. For now, thanks for listening in. If you've enjoyed this podcast, do drop us a review on Spotify and also on Apple. And the team behind this episode is Jacqueline Chan, Joanne Chan, Tiffany Ang, Saya Win, and Crispina Robin. I'm Stephen Chia, signing off. See you next week.